Do you hear that distant hum of tires slicing through hot, humid night air as you step onto the shoulder of Interstate 45? The asphalt beneath your boots seems to pulse with every heartbeat, and a faint, metallic scent like old blood or scorched rubber drifts across your senses. Somewhere just beyond the glow of the taillights, something waits in the darkness. You're listening to 102 Hours where stories don't just get told, they come alive in the dark. Tonight, you plunge into a stretch of Texas highway notorious for swallowing the young and leaving their bodies in shallow graves. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to 102 Hours, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments so we can figure out where you're creeping along this highway with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let 102 Hours guide you into tonight's journey. You trudge along the cracked shoulder at exactly midnight, the heat still radiating off the road. Like a living thing, a single street lamp flickers ahead, casting long skeletal shadows across the overgrown grass. This is where it all began. A young woman's body discovered in 1971, just inches from the highway's edge. Mainstream criminology credits that era for coining the term serial killer, as FBI behavioral units surged in prominence after solving the Zodiac murders. The silence feels alive. A breeze rustles through the weeds, and you feel a prickle crawl up your spine. This place earned its grim nickname, the Killing Fields, not for any Far East battle but for the hidden graves, discovered here over more than 5 decades. Investigators still question whether the same person is responsible for all the disappearances. You bend to examine the gravel where the first victim's clothes were found discarded like so much litter. Local legend claims passing drivers sometimes glimpse a lone woman in white, wandering beside the highway before vanishing into the night. Fringe tidbit that fuels late-night daredevils and restless souls alike. You smack your hand against your thigh to shake off the goose flesh. Your headlamp beam skitters over the trees lining the road. Trees that have witnessed more than 34 bodies unearthed since the 1970s. Each grave as shallow and forgotten as the last. You recall that modern forensic databases like CODIS wouldn't emerge until the late 1980s, meaning early evidence went untested for years. You notice the hush of crickets and the distant roar of trucks bleeding grey light across the field. A discarded shoe half buried in dirt catches your eye. Its laces frayed, maybe a clue, maybe a remnant of panic. Investigators still question whether any truly escaped this roadside graveyard to tell the tale. A sudden rustle to your left sends your pulse racing. You freeze, ears straining, but only a tumbleweed skitters away. You exhale, letting the breath shudder out of your chest. The night offers a brief reprieve, but then you imagine those shallow graves just barely hidden under weeds and windblown trash. You picture detectives in the 1980s combing this stretch, only to leave empty-handed as dawn bled orange across the sky. One detective later confessed he heard voices in the fields. You trace your fingers along a splintered fence post, its wood worn smooth by decades of hands, some gentle, some frantic. A drop of sweat rolls down your temple, mingling with the dirt on your cheek. You push onward, each step nudging you deeper into the highway's pulse. The taillights of a passing 18-wheeler blind you for a second, and when your vision clears, the grass beside you seems darker, thicker. You swallow hard. A single twig snaps underfoot. Your flashlight flickers, and for a heartbeat, you think you see movement in the ditch. Then it's gone. like a dream dissolving at sunrise. You remind yourself this stretch of road isn't just myth, it's real. In the early 2000s, investigators trained specially on cold cases exhumed here managed to link to victims through DNA, marking one of the first uses of genetic genealogy in Texas. The highway hums again. You're not alone. Something stirs just beyond your light's reach. You kneel at the edge of that purposefully obscured hollow, barely more than a shallow rut in the dirt, your palms settling on loose soil that gives under your weight. The moon, half swallowed by drifting clouds, casts a pale light over the pit. Inside, you glimpse fragments of fabric threadbare, stained with time tangled around brittle bones. The air here tastes of clay and old rot, a reminder that this was once a hurried burial, hastily covered before darkness swallowed the deed. Your fingertips brush against a rusted zipper, and you notice the angle of the cut in the grass, as though each blade was sliced by a single, glinting blade. A frigid whisper of wind rattles the overhanging branches, and you swear you hear a soft sigh, like a young woman exhaling a final breath. Local folklore insists that at this spot, those buried here sometimes leave handprints in the mud, only to vanish by dawn. A fringe tidbit passed nervously among truckers fueling up at the nearby station. This first victim, discovered in August 1971 by a pair of passing teenagers, was there for weeks before patrolmen spotted the disturbed earth. By then, scavenging animals had already scattered small remains along the embankment. Mainstream forensic protocols at the time were rudimentary. Fingerprinting held sway, and forensic anthropology was still emerging as a formal discipline. It wouldn't be until the late 1970s that the American Board of Forensic Anthropology was founded. You bend closer, careful not to let your flashlight beam stray too wildly. The bones are fragile, yellowed by time, and you imagine the toll of Texas heat cracking their surface. You remember that the first official serial killer designation in US law enforcement doctrine didn't solidify until 1976, meaning investigators in 71 had no blueprint to link these crimes under one unifying theory. Investigators still question whether that initial murder inspired later killings, or if it was a lone act that predated a darker series. A faint rustling draws your eyes to a crumpled photograph, half buried at the grave's edge. You carefully lift it free, brushing away grit to reveal a smiling teenager clutching a small dog, her face alive with laughter. Who was she, you wonder, and for a moment you feel the weight of her stolen future pressing down on you. Science had little recourse then for identifying remains from isolated bones. Dental records, if available, were the gold standard. In this case, records were scant, and the young woman went nameless for years, catalogued only as Jane Doe number 1. It wasn't until decades later, when mitochondrial DNA testing became widely accessible, that her identity was finally confirmed as Shirley Ann Frost. Age 19, a small victory in a story otherwise drenched in loss. You trace a finger along a faint groove in the soil, where a shovel's blade left a mark. The ground there feels softer, like a wound barely covered. You imagine someone racing against time, heart pounding, eyes darting, filling in the pit before bright headlights betrayed their presence. Did they pause? Did they look back at what they'd done? The surrounding grass sways, and you notice tiny wildflowers, Indian blanket, bloom sprouting defiantly at the grave's lip. Flowers aren't native to all corpses, but folklore holds that these particular blossoms only grow where innocence was stolen. Another fringe rumor drawing thrill seekers at night. You sit back on your heels, the weight of the moment lodged. In your chest, it's easy to get caught in the romanticized thrill of dark myths, but beneath them lies something colder. Modern crime scene protocols instituted nationwide. By the early 1980s, stressed preserving every fragment of evidence. Yet at this very spot, no one foresaw the need for latex gloves or sterility. So crucial now for DNA extraction, you feel the encroaching dampness of the earth as night air settles again. Somewhere up the highway, a patrolman's radio crackles. Voices indistinct. A fresh case, maybe. You swallow, tasting dust and unease. Investigators still question whether any trace evidence could have survived here. Decades of rain and highway runoff have likely washed away fibers and trace chemicals. Once clinging to bones, gloved fingers tug at a small metal button embedded in the dirt. Old Levi's, you recognize. Popular even then among working-class teens. In nearby Baytown, it's a mundane detail, but it's the kind that gave early detectives hope something to tie a name to the remains. Yet it would take until 2003's forensics boom, when genetic genealogy cracked cold cases nationwide, for Shirley's family to finally have closure. You rise, brushing loose soil off your jeans. The pit feels like a hollow echo of every other shallow grave along this cursed corridor. You shine your light up the shoulder. The asphalt gleams, unremarkable, indifferent. Traffic roars by, oblivious to your vigil. Silence hangs again, broken by your own breathing. You have enough to tell this story, yet so many questions remain. Who walked these fields at night? Who left flowers upon unmarked graves? And most hauntingly, will be next. You stand, dusting dirt from your palms. The highway hum surges as a semi barrels past, its headlights carving fleeting shadows through the trees. You take one last look at the hollower reminder that evil often thrives in the simplest of places. A hurried pit, a single torn zipper, a nameless girl. With that, you turn and head back toward the faint glow of the road, the thud of your footsteps swallowed by the night. You pause beneath a flickering overpass light, the roar of traffic above a distant thunder that never quite fades. Here, as you shine your beam across the asphalt, you realize you've stepped into a grim tapestry woven from patterns rather than chance. One by one, you trace the similarities. Nearly all the victims were between 16 and 25, dressed in light-colored tops and denim attire, likely chosen for summer nights along the highway. A faint breeze carries the scent of gasoline and desert wildflowers, as if nature itself is complicit in preserving these echoes of loss. Mainstream criminology didn't formalize the concept of a victimology study until the late 1970s. But by 1985, the FBI established VICAP to track serial offenses based on details like age, appearance, and circumstances, a response to patterns exactly like those you now observe here. You crouch to inspect rust-flecked fragments of a pale blouse, realizing it matches the style worn by another victim found just 3 miles north last spring. The fabric is so thin that when dawn hits, it will seem almost translucent, much like the borders between life and death that so many crossed on these roads. You rise, brushing dust from your fingertips, and take a step back to survey the landscape. Notice how each discovery occurred near entry points, the Shell station, the truck stop, the rest area, places where someone young and alone could easily drift off the highway for a moment of privacy. At each of these spots, you recall a pair of headlights vanished into the darkness seconds before a scream or a thud could register. Investigators still question whether these common stopovers were chosen by the killer as a methodical ritual or simply by convenience. A passing 18-wheeler sends a gust of warm air whipping your hair. You imagine the victims' girls clutching ice-cold sodas in styrofoam cups, laughing or scrolling through phones. The glow on their faces, the last light they might ever see. A fringe rumor insists that some evenings, a figure in a long coat mimics the posture of hitchhikers, luring victims in before vanishing in plain sight. Truckers whisper about seeing that coat flit in the distance, though no one has ever produced proof beyond grainy headlights and half-glimpsed silhouettes. You shine your light toward the embankment where 3 sets of footprints converge into one. Each pair bears the same average shoe-size women's, 7 to 8. Scuff marks at the heels suggest nervous pacing. For a heartbeat, you crouch and compare them to a boot print you found earlier. The difference is in the tread. A distinctive, triangular pattern favored by a popular brand in the 1970s. You can almost chart a timeline. Jogger turns. County cruiser sweeps past. Victim overtaken. It's as if the highway itself orchestrates their final steps. A distant cicada chorus thrums in time with your heartbeat. You notice the subtle grooves in the dirt where each victim was laid, gentle depressions that match the length of an adult body. You lean in, pressing your palm into the soft earth, feeling the hollow ache of countless lives buried with the same negligent precision. Modern forensic mapping software, now standard in homicide units, could overlay these points into a chilling constellation, revealing a pattern of spacing and timing. Yet in the early 90s, the Gulf Coast Task Force had none of those tools. They relied on printed maps and gut instinct. Investigators still question whether better technology would have caught the killer sooner, or merely marked the graves more clearly. You shift your gaze skyward. The moon is a sliver, half hidden, mirroring the half-truths of this case. You remember that most victims were last seen wearing similar gold hoop earrings, comb-on accessories, yet oddly consistent. A battered earring lies nearby, one hoop missing. Its clasp, you pick it up, the metal cool and rough, and slip it into your pocket. It feels weighty, as though holding a fragment of each young life snuffed out along this strip of road. The hum of distant radio static drifts from a police scanner, pinned to your belt. Snatches of conversation, unidentified female. Possible ID through dental records. No witnesses yet. You wipe sweat from your brow and imagine those records being painstakingly compared by light bulb desks and magnifying glasses, precursors to today's facial recognition software. You can almost see the faces emerging on screen, their outlines blurred by time and rain. You step over a tuft of tall grass, where a pattern emerges in the dirt, a cluster of 3 graves, spaced nearly exactly a quarter-mile apart. Each one falls between mile markers 17 and 18. You recall that markers were repainted in 1993, which muddied early reports. A fringe theory claims the killer used the markers as metronomes, timing his drives between dumps with mechanical precision. You let your flashlight linger on the faint red paint of the latest marker. It almost reads like a countdown dot. Your stomach twists as you confront the most chilling pattern. Many victims were last seen on Friday nights, around the same hour when nightfall arrives quickest in summer. You imagine a calendar rows of dates dotted in red, with disappearances converging into a streak of terror. You slide your hand over your mouth to stifle a gasp as a gust of wind rustles through the pasture. Grass, sounding eerily like footsteps approaching from behind. You spin, beams sweeping empty fields, and swallow hard. Above the stars, wink in silent testimony. You tuck your flashlight under your arm and close your eyes, drawing in a lungful of warm, musky night air. The patterns you've seen age attire, stopovers, earrings, headlight glimpses, they form a mosaic of youthful innocence, colliding with calculated evil. Yet for all these parallels, no composite sketch has ever fit every clue. Investigators still question whether the anomalous slightly older victims, different dress, midday sightings, represent copycats or threads of a single elusive narrative. You open your eyes and feel the weight of those parallels pressing down. The highway beckons, its asphalt veins pulsing with history and unanswered questions. You step forward, letting the patterns guide you onward, deeper into the dark heart of the killing fields. You step beneath a canopy of whispering pines. The highway's roar now a distant murmur behind you. The moonlight filters through swaying branches, painting ghostly patterns on the cracked pavement. Here, along this forgotten verge, local legends take on a life of their own tales, whispered in hushed tones around truck stop diners and motel lobbies. Some say the roadside grasses themselves carry the echoes of final breaths, while others insist you can hear footsteps crunching dead leaves when no one's there. It's said that late at night, if you lean over the fence rail by mile marker 17, you'll glimpse a pale figure draped in a soiled sundress, her hair matted and eyes black as coal. Drivers claim the woman stands at the edge of the road and, when headlights sweep past, she vanishes, leaving behind only a faint scent of gardenia and decay. Fringe rumor holds that she's one of the earliest victims, still searching for justice decades later. Mainstream historians note that folklore around serial crimes has long been part of American true crime culture, beginning with the Jack the Ripper panic in 1888, when Londoners spun tales of ghostly cries in alleyways before sunrise. In Texas, those traditions merged with frontier ghost stories, giving rise to a unique tapestry of dread that blankets this stretch of I-for 5. You press your palm to the weathered fence post, its wood abrasive against your soaked skin, and you feel a tremor in the air as if the land itself pulses with grief. Somewhere behind you, a solitary cricket taps out an irregular Morse code. You bend your ear, straining to decode meaning, but only frustration settles in your chest. Investigators still question whether these spectral sightings share roots with genuine sightings, whether they're the byproduct of collective trauma seeping into local myth. A distant dog howls, a plaintive lament that cuts through the humid night. You recall that in 1975, a marine biologist turned folklorist published a study on the psychological impact of unsolved crimes, concluding that communities often create ghost stories as a coping mechanism. That research marked one of the first interdisciplinary bridges between true crime investigation and cultural anthropology. You wander toward a dimly lit pull-off, where the grass grows tall enough to hide a body from passing headlights. This spot carries its own legend, a phantom hitchhiker who appears at precisely 13 a.m., thumbing a ride in tattered clothing. If you stop to offer assistance, they slip into your vehicle without a sound and, once the engine turns over, you find the seat wet with dew, yet empty when you glance back. A fringe detail claims the hitchhiker leaves behind a single red rose, petals pristine against the grit of your floor mat. Your flashlight beam slides across a smear of white paint on the guardrail, an X that someone, long ago, marked as a warning. Locals debate its origin. Some say it was drawn by an angry friend of a victim. Others that it's the killer's own signature, a taunt to authorities. Investigators still question whether the X holds any coded meaning or is simply the crude graffiti of grief. You inhale deeply, tasting a blend of diesel fumes and night-blooming jasmine. The latter grows wild along the embankments, a botanical oddity that thrives in sandy soil. Folklore suggests jasmine only flowers in places stained with innocent blood, another fringe tidbit fueling urban legends. You can almost imagine petals drifting across the graves at dawn, a silent tribute to lives cut short. A sudden breeze rustles a torn scrap of paper caught in the fence wire. You lean down and snatch it free, smoothing creases with trembling fingers. It's a fragment of a prayer card, an image of the Sacred Heart surrounded by flowers, the name and date worn away by wind and rain. You feel its weight in your hand, a tangible link between faith and fear. In 1982, the local sheriff's office documented dozens of similar tokens found near crime scenes. Though no official explanation was ever released, you slip the paper into your pocket and walk on each footstep, stirring whispers from the grass. The trees here seem to lean in, their limbs creaking like arthritic joints. You recall that environmental psychologists have found humans are wired to perceive patterns in randomness, often leading to sightings of faces or figures where none exist. Yet in this place, you wonder if the apparitions are born of something more tangible up ahead. A weather-beaten sign reading caution, high accident area stands crooked, its warning faded. You pause beneath it, scanning the roadside. A chorus of frogs croaks from a nearby drainage ditch, as if keeping time with unseen marchers. Some locals call it the grave ditch, believing it's a conduit between this world and the next. Fringe lore insists that on moonless nights, the water glows faintly where a body lies beneath. You pop a small recorder from your jacket pocket and press play. The last clip you captured on your final visit to this spot crackles through the speaker, a soft female voice, barely audible, whispering "help me," before static swallowed the rest. Shivers race down your spine as you listen. Was it a trick of the wind or a genuine plea? Investigators still question whether that recording holds forensic value or is simply auditory pareidolia. Our brains forcing order on chaos. Clutching the recorder, you step over a fallen branch and enter a narrow path veering off the highway. You shine your light on earthen mounds barely discernible beneath wild grasses. Someone has strung faded ribbons between the trees, pastel threads fluttering like spectral bunting. You follow the trail and find an assortment of trinkets: a rusted toy car, a chipped teacup, a single ballet slipper. Each item seems carefully placed, an offering to unseen presences. Reports from the 1990s mention similar altars erected by grieving families, yet few were ever officially catalogued. Mainstream true crime podcasts now cover these makeshift shrines, examining the intersection of loss and ritual. You trace your fingers over the ballet slipper's satin straps, once white, now stained brown, and you imagine the child who danced before this place became a tableau of nightmares. You look skyward. Clouds have swallowed the moon, plunging you into near darkness. The only illumination comes from your torch and the distant highway lights, which blur into mottled pools of yellow. Your heart thunders as you sense movement beyond the glider, sudden rustle, then stillness. You know you're not alone. You hold your breath, listening to the lullaby of night insects and the low hum of distant engines. The ribbons sway in a wind you cannot feel, as if untethered by any breeze you can detect. You swallow, the knot in your throat tightening. Every legend, every ghost story you've ever heard feels alive here, tangling with the cruel reality of vanished women and unmarked graves. You press onward, each step carrying you deeper into the realm where myth and murder converge. Somewhere beyond this flickering path lies the next chapter of horror. You tighten your grip on the recorder and whisper to yourself, "Be ready." You slip past the faded motel sign and follow the thin ribbon of asphalt toward a cluster of broken streetlights, where the county's cold case team has stationed itself tonight. The air crackles with tension. Flashlights bob against the darkness like searching fireflies. You step into their makeshift command poster, beaten-up cargo trailer outfitted with folding tables, maps pinned to corkboards, and a tangle of extension cords snaking to laptops. The lead detective, a wiry woman with tired eyes, gestures for you to crouch beside her. She's been with the force since the early 90s, back when true crime units were just starting to embrace multidisciplinary teams. Mainstream law enforcement didn't widely adopt the multidisciplinary cold case model combining homicide, forensics, and behavioral analysts until the mid-1990s. After the Green River and Long Island serial murder, investigations proved its value. That shift laid the groundwork for tonight's gathering, where detectives, lab techs, and profilers converge under a single tarp. You watch her trace red string between pushpins marking victim locations, her finger trembling as it crosses. Mile markers stretching southward. "We're missing one link," she murmurs, eyes fixed on a cluster near an abandoned rest area. You lean in, the glow of a laptop screen illuminating your facet digital mosaic of crime scene photos and infrared scans. One photo catches your breath, a half-buried backpack with a heart-shaped charm dangling from the zipper. A fringe tidbit claims the charm belonged to a traveling circus performer's daughter. A story that's never been substantiated but circulates among late-night true crime forums. A young forensic analyst kneels across from you, brushing synthetic fiber samples into numbered envelopes. She explains that modern trace evidence fibers, soil, pollen can yield geographic clues thanks to databases created after 2005, when the FBI rolled out the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. But back when these graves were first uncovered, investigators didn't even preserve standard shoe prints. The notion of a trace evidence unit was still largely theoretical. You imagine the frustration in those early years, flipping through dusty case files with nothing but vague witness statements to guide them. Suddenly, the detective's radio crackles. "Subject at rest area. Possible sighting." She looks up, eyes narrowing. You step outside the trailer and follow her flashlight beam toward a graffiti-scrawled concrete barrier. Beside it lies a discarded cell phone, its screen cracked but still faintly glowing. You kneel to pick it up, careful not to disturb potential prints. The phone bears a sticker of a cartoon skull, an odd detail that seems incongruous with the somber scene. Investigators still question whether these modern Rex phones, earbuds, energy drink can signal a new wave of victims or simply litter from passing traffic. You hand the phone to a detective with latex-clad fingers. She taps it, unlocking a jumble of selfies and short videos stitched into a timeline. "This belonged to Emily Vargas," she says, voice low. "Emily disappeared 2 years ago after walking out of a local convenience store clutching a slushie." Your chest tightens in the shimmering glow of that phone screen. You see her bright smile one last time. A behavioral analyst leans in behind you, peering over your shoulder. She's assembling a timeline chart, plotting the last known movements of each victim on a 24-hour clock. "The killer may have followed a schedule," she says, tracing an arc between dusk and midnight. You notice she's using a method pioneered in 1989 after the Atlanta child murders, a technique that overlaid suspect sightings with victim disappearances. To narrow down windows of opportunity, the detective calls everyone's attention and unfurls a large map of the stretch between League City and Baytown. Crime scene markers, lab results, and witness reports clutter the surface in a chaotic collage. She points to a faint smudge near mile marker 16. We ran soil from that spot through our new geolocation database, she explains. It matched clay samples from a construction site on the outskirts of Houston. A ripple of excitement passes through the team. This is the kind of lead they've chased for decades. You step back and take in the scene. A modern cold case task force operating under floodlights, drawing on technology that the original detectives could only have dreamed of. Yet your heart sinks with the realization that every advance underscores how much time has slipped away since those first bodies surfaced. As the wind picks up, you feel the hairs on your arms bristle. A seasoned detective flicks through a battered case file, pausing on a witness statement about a dark sedan seen idling at the rest area. But descriptions vary, she admits. Some say it was a Ford, others swear it was a Mercury. Investigators still question whether conflicting car reports reflect multiple perpetrators or the fog of trauma affecting memory. The detective steps aside, and you follow a tech specialist to a laptop streaming grainy video from a long-cabled pole camera installed along the highway. The footage is grainy, black and white static intermittently washing out the picture, but for a few seconds, you see a figure in a long coat stepping off the road and into the grass. You lean closer, heart pounding, as the outline drifts out of frame. Look at the gate, the analyst whispers, looping the clip in slow motion. The figure's stride is wide, almost deliberate. You compare it to known offender profiles, recalling that gait analysis only became admissible in court around 2013 after advances in biomechanical research. Before then, such observations were deemed too subjective. Now, it's another piece of the puzzle. Suddenly, the detective taps a row of case files stamped Unsolved. She pulls one out, a folder on a young woman named Lisa Montgomery, whose remains were discovered near mile marker 19 in 1987. Her killer may have returned to the scene, the detective says, eyes narrowing on a small arrow someone has scrawled on the photo. You stare at the arrow, the thin ink line pointing toward the field where earlier victims lay. A chill crawls up your spine. A breeze rustles the maps, and the team murmurs as they rearrange notes. You step aside, feeling the weight of their collective gaze, each set of eyes reflecting years of frustration, dedication, and sorrow. The modern techniques give hope, but they also spotlight every missed opportunity from the past. You tuck your hands into your jacket pockets and inhale the night air, tasting diesel fumes and dew-soaked grass. The detective claps her hands and declares, "All right, team time to set up a sweep at first light." You sense the resolve in her voice, the unspoken promise that they won't let another name slip into the soil. But as you glance back toward the inky fields, you feel the old question rising once more. Can cutting-edge forensics and tireless investigators finally catch a killer who has evaded them for half a century? Investigators still question whether justice will ever be served for these silent graves along the highway. You step away from the trailer, the flicker of lanterns receding behind you. Above, the stars wheel in silent orbit. Somewhere in there, cold light, you imagine the answers lie waiting, buried just beneath the surface. You step into the faint glow of a single spotlight aimed at a flat expanse of dirt where investigators have laid out yellow evidence markers in a jagged line. Your eyes narrow as you study the faint impressions in the soil footprints, tire tracks, even the shallow indent where a gloved hand might have pressed to steady a body. These traces are all the proof you have of someone who left no name, no face, but whose methodical precision lingers in every detail. Mainstream profiling traces its roots to the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, formally established in 1972 after the Son of Sam murders highlighted the need for psychological analysis in serial cases. You recall that unit's earliest profiles were rough sketches, gender, age range, basic habits, but they marked a turning point in how law enforcement approached suspects. Tonight, their legacy lives on in a set of laminated cards clipped to nearby trees, each card listing inferred traits: male, mid-30s to early 40s, solitary occupation, adept at blending into highway traffic. You crouch beside marker 7, where a pair of shallow grooves suggests a small utility vehicle backed into the ditch. The tire treads match a rare pattern sold only by a defunct Ohio manufacturer, one that ceased production in 1980. Fringe rumor claims a custom restoration of those tires appears on a classic pickup spotted idling near mile marker 18 in 1986, though no photos or registrations ever confirmed it. You tap the edge of the print, feeling the hard clay give just a millimeter under your fingertip. A forensic sketch, drawn in charcoal pastels, is pinned to a plywood board. The suspect's features are deliberately generica: square jaw, hair, sunglasses, reflecting distant headlights. You imagine him pacing these fields, invisible behind tinted lenses, pocket knife or garrote, always at the ready. Modern behavioral analysts use computerized pattern matching to refine these sketches. But back in the mid-70s, profilers relied on intuition, gut feelings, honed by interviews and crime scene observations. Investigators still question whether those early instincts led them closer to the killer or steered them down fruitless paths. You rise and walk to a folding table where a trio of black and white photographs lie arranged in a neat row. Each image shows the same stretch of road under different seasonal conditions. Summer lightning bugs flickering among tall grasses, winter mist curling across the asphalt, spring wildflowers blooming like a fragile audience. In each photo, you spot the same dark shape at the tree line, a vehicle too distant to identify, but impossible to ignore once you've seen it. A fringe detail whispered on old message boards suggests the killer used an old model Ford Limited, its chassis modified to hide fresh blood, and that drivers sometimes glimpsed its taillights flicker like an ember before disappearing. Behind you, a radar gun rests on a tripod, trained on the highway's northbound lane. You squint at the digital readout. Consistent speeds around 45 sampai 50 mph. Nothing unusual, until you notice an uptick to 65 miles per hour. Every Friday night between 10 p.m. and midnight, the same window when most victims vanished. You imagine a driver heart drumming, adrenaline flicking like a faulty fuse, flooring the gas for a half mile before braking hard at the grass verge. It's a calculated routine, repeated dozens of times over decades, each run echoing the last like a sinister metronome. A small notebook lies open on the table, its pages filled with cryptic shorthand. Tire 315 dividido por 70 menos 15. Glove fibers, polyester blend, voice low, calm. You flip through pages, noting dates and initials, a timeline of obsessions. You picture the suspect poring over his own logs, calibrating each action for maximum control. It's chilling to think someone catalogued these abductions as though collecting stamps. Modern detectives cross-reference such notes against phone records and credit card transactions. But a shadowy figure might have used burner phones and cash common tactics long before financial footprints became standard in investigations. You move toward a nearby tree where a small bundle of worn camouflage fabric hangs from a nail. It's frayed and stained, like an old hunting blind tarp. A fringe account claims the killer used that material to camera victims for transport, leaving behind scraps that blew free onto the highway. You run your fingers along the coarse fibers, noting a faint trace of gasoline consistent with a nearby storage tank that once leaked into the surrounding soil. Scientists now can extract hydrocarbon signatures from decades-old materials. Investigators still question whether that method could link this patch of tarpaulin to a suspect's garage. A low hum catches your attention as you glance up to see a drone hovering overhead, its spotlight sweeping the tree line. Drone surveillance only became widespread in law enforcement after 2010, following several high-profile manhunts. Tonight, it captures infrared heat signatures, looking for ground-level disturbances. But the drone's feed flickers, the tree's canopy creating blind spots, and you wonder if some secrets are meant to stay hidden. Beneath rustling leaves, you step back to the dirt bank, where another set of markings resembles letters, X carved into the trunk of a small oak. Some say it's a killer's monogram, others that it's the initials of his first victim. Fringe law even proposes that the carving was made by the victim herself, as a plea for help before succumbing. You trace the grooves, imagining a frail hand scraping into living wood. Investigators still question whether this was a genuine message or a later addition by amateur sleuths seeking connection. Your foot nudges a small, corroded key lying half buried in the mud. Its shape is odd square bow, unusually thick staymand. You recognize it from an old set of utility locks used on roadside phone booths, phased out in the late 1980s. What was it unlocking? A payphone, a weapon cache. You picture a cluttered locker somewhere, keys dangling like trophies on a ring. A sudden gust whistles through, and you catch a faint echo. A muffled engine revving, perhaps at the end of the field. You spin, flashlight, cutting through the dark, but see nothing, only the highway's faint glow. You swallow, tasting dust and fear. Could the suspect still be watching, observing your every move? You close your eyes and breathe deeply. All these fragments, dire treads, notebook scrawl, scattered fabric. Drone shadows form a silhouette of a person you've never met. Someone meticulous, patient, carrying a map of these fields in his mind long before you ever arrived. Yet, despite the wealth of clues, he remains a ghost. You tuck the notebook into your coat pocket and stand tall. The night air feels charged, alive with potential leads and unanswered questions. As you glance back at the evidence markers, you realize that every detail you've catalogued tonight could be the thread that unravels decades of silence. But as you step away, you can't help but ask yourself, is this meticulous portrait of a killer enough to finally bring him into the light? Investigators still question whether the sum of these sparse clues will ever point unequivocally to one man. You step off the asphalt and onto a carpet of fallen pine needles, the forest floor soft underfoot. Your flashlight beam skims over tangled underbrush where someone years ago is said to have drawn cryptic symbols in the dirt, circles intersected by lines, triangles entwined with crescent shapes. You crouch to trace a barely visible marking, an inverted cross enclosing a spiral. Local whisperers claim it's proof of ritualistic killings tied to a cult worshipper. Fringe theory scoffed at by many but fervently debated in underground forums. Mainstream criminology acknowledges that linking occult symbols to true crime can be more sensational than substantive. Rigorous studies in the late 1990s found scant evidence of ritual murders in serial cases, attributing most symbols to subcultures and copycat embellishments. Yet you can't shake the feeling that these markings weren't random graffiti. They lie too close to the spot where a fourth victim's body was found arranged in the grass, with her arms crossed over her chest and a single white feather placed atop her sternum. A breeze stirs the needles on the ground, and you notice tiny shards of what looks like chalk dust around the symbol. You kneel to scoop a pinch into your pommets, texture gritty and cool. Fringe lore contends that chalk was used in ceremonies to bind spirits, a theory fueled by a 2005 blog post from an anonymous, self-proclaimed occult investigator, claiming to have witnessed such rites on moonless nights. You glance around, half expecting a hooded figure to step from the shadows and chant in a forgotten tongue. While forensic anthropology did not officially recognize ritual evidence as a category until the early 2000s, a handful of homicide units began training to distinguish staged crime scenes from symbolic displays. You imagine experts donning white suits, meticulously photographing every line in the dirt, searching for broom bristles or footprints that suggest a human hand arranged the scene. Here, your souls have disturbed the evidence, but the faint pattern remains etched into the earth as stubbornly as the unanswered questions. Your light drifts to a half-buried book cover, the leather chipped and torn. You pull it free, a tattered copy of the Lesser Key of Solomon, its pages missing but the title embossed in gold. Fringe chatter suggests the killer consulted ceremonial texts, believing the rituals would grant power over life and death. You flip the cover between your fingers, noting the embossed sigils mirror images of the chalk symbols underfoot. You wonder if the book fell here by accident, or if it was left as a gruesome calling card. Investigators still question whether such props, books, feathers, symbols are genuine occult paraphernalia or simply macabre theatrics designed to mislead law enforcement. You recall that in the infamous Bible John case in Scotland, detectives initially chased ritualistic angles before DNA evidence refocused the investigation. Could this killing field be a twisted echo of that misdirection? A sudden rustle in the brush draws your gaze to a small clearing where stones are arranged in a loose circle. You approach, heart pounding, and realize someone has crafted a makeshift altar. The stones cradle remnants of white candles, their stubs blackened and charred. Dark red stains linger on a flat slab at the center, too faded to identify if it's rust or dried wax mixed with something darker. You imagine a clandestine gathering under a new moon, participants chanting softly as the candles burned down, their faces hidden in hoods. You lift a piece of candle stub, breaking it in two. The interior is crumbly, infused with what smells like myrrh resin used in ancient rites. Fringe enthusiasts argue that myrrh was chosen for its association with purification, suggesting the killer believed the act sanctified his evil. You discard the stub onto the ground, where it mingles with decomposing leaves, a collision of past and present violence. Modern investigators, equipped with mass spectrometers, can now pinpoint chemical traces in candle wax, linking them to specific manufacturers and batches. If they test this wax, they could tie it to a store purchase made decades ago. Yet after years of unearthing shallow graves, few samples have survived intact, and many are too contaminated by soil acidity to yield usable data. Investigators still question whether any candle fragments here remain viable for analysis. Your light catches a length of frayed rope hanging from a low branch. Its fibers stiff and coarse. You tug gently, freeing it from the branch. It's soaked through and matted with grime, perhaps once used to bind hands or secure a body. Fringe rumor insists the rope was dyed with ceremonial oils, making its fibers glow faintly under ultraviolet light. You flick on your UV torch and sweep it across the rope, nothing but dull brown. You pocket the rope anyway. Every artifact might reveal a fragment of truth. Above, the pines creak in the darkness, their limbs groaning like old doors. A distant howl, maybe a coyote, or perhaps a lamenting spirit echoes through the clearing. You exhale, feeling the weight of centuries of superstition settling around you. Yet beneath the allure of the occult lies a more prosaic fact. Ritualistic elements can emerge from media influence and local rumor as much as from genuine practice. You kneel once more to inspect the chalk lines. Faint indentations suggest they were drawn with the heel of a gloved shoe rather than a stick, hinting at deliberate staging. Still, you can't ignore the possibility. Someone here mixed belief with brutality, creating a tableau that transcended simple murder. Investigators still question whether the rituals served a spiritual purpose for the killer, or were orchestrated solely to terrorize and mystify. You stand, brushing dirt from your knees, and shine your light toward the highway's dim outline. The asphalt gleams, untouched by the macabre rites hidden just beyond its edge. You take a final look at the altar stones and chalk symbols before stepping back onto the path. The forest seems to lean away, closing ranks around its secrets. You tighten your grip on the flashlight, the beam cutting a clear path through the gloom. Ahead, the road calls you onward, its dark ribbon leading you to the next mystery. But you carry these ritualistic whispers with you now, echoes of a killer who choreographed each crime like a perverse ceremony. Whether they're genuine rites or theatrical facades, they've implanted themselves in the fields, layering legend onto real-world horror. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with damp earth and pine. The altar fades behind you, but its imprint lingers in your mind. A silent ritual and an unanswered question that follows every step you take along these cursed fields. You step into a clearing where the faint orange glow of dawn has yet to touch the horizon, leaving the fields swathed in pre-dawn darkness. Here, beyond the reach of streetlights and traffic, dozens of weathered case files lie stacked on a battered folding table, their edges are frayed. The paper yellowed, each file a testament to a life cut short and a mystery that refused to close. You lift the top folder, labeled simply Unidentified Female 1978, and thumb through its brittle pages. Photographs of a young woman's face stare back at you, eyes wide with unspeakable fear. Mainstream homicide units acknowledge that backlog in cold cases peaks when resources are limited. By the mid-2000s, nationwide cold case squads had reduced unsolved murders by only 15%, despite advances in DNA and databases. Yet here on I-45, the backlog feels infinite. You run your finger along a report listing cause of death, undetermined, followed by scribbled notes, no witnesses, no personal effects, shallow burial. You imagine the original detectives shifting through files in the 1980s, before the internet or nationwide crime centers. Their only leads typed into rotary phone dialers. Investigators still question how many victims slipped through the cracks, simply because their cases lacked the data points to trigger a serial link analysis. A faint rustle draws your attention to a metal filing cabinet tucked beneath the table. Its drawers creak as you open them to reveal dozens more folders, each tagged by year: 1972, 1974, 1976. A fringe rumor claims some of these files vanished altogether in a clerical purge during a 1991 office move, fueling speculation that crucial evidence was tossed to save space. You tap the cabinet's side, its cold metal humming with bureaucratic secrets. You lift a file marked Baytown Jane Doe, discovered in 1983. Inside, a sketch artist's depiction fills the page, drawn from witness reports that described a pale teenager with auburn hair. Below, a note in shaky handwriting reads, "Possible family in Louisiana, no confirmation." Mainstream forensics acknowledges that facial reconstructions only achieved consistent accuracy in the 1990s with CT scanning. Before that, they relied on clay models and speculative tissue depths, leaving many Jane and John as unidentified. You pocket the sketch and pull out an evidence bag containing a single, tarnished locket. Inside, a sepia-toned photograph of a smiling couple, their faces blurred by time. Fringe theorists suggest the photo depicts a cult member and his accomplice, a duo who vanished in 1979 after rumors of a mass ritual by the Killings Fields. Official records confirm such a group ever existed, but sightings of two figures in cloaks near the site persist in whispered anecdotes. Your gaze drifts across the table to a small memorial, a wooden placard listing 34 names and dates, line representing a victim whose case is unsolved or only partially resolved. You trace the dates with your eye: 1971, 1975, 1977, 1980, gaps where no disappearances were recorded. Yet local law insists that bodies were found, but never linked to the killing fields by law enforcement. Investigators still question whether administrative boundaries between counties left some cases uncounted in official tallies. You stand and step back from the table, the weight of hundreds of lost stories pressing down on you. The air tastes of dew and diesel, a reminder that life on this highway rushes on, indifferent to tragedies half a mile off the road. A lone crow swoops overhead, its call echoing across the fields, as if mocking your helplessness. You notice a small stack of handwritten journals beside the files, diaries kept by families of the missing who camped here, hoping for breakthroughs. One entry reads, "I dreamt she called my name from the weeds." Another laments, "They told me she was never coming home." Mainstream psychology recognizes that family members of missing persons endure ambiguous loss, a stress escape first studied in the 1970s that underscores the enduring trauma of unresolved cases. You pick up a journal, its cover stained with tears, and flip to a page where a mother sketched her daughter's silhouette beside the highway. Alongside the drawing, she scrawled a prayer: "Bring me back." Fringe rumor asserts that some pages contained coded messages, coordinates, and timestamps suggesting a private investigator's clandestine mapping project that never reached police hands. You replace the journal and step toward the highway edge. The first streaks of pink light trace the horizon, and the silhouette of your vigil fades into the day. Yet the files remain silent witnesses to decades of unanswered pleas. Investigators still question whether a renewed public focus or legislative overhaul could break the backlog wide open. Paving the way for justice, you turn back to the table and take one final look at the mountain of folders. Each one needs revisiting, evidence re-examined, DNA retested, digital databases scoured. The sheer scope of incomplete investigations staggers you, a testament to both human perseverance and bureaucratic failure. A sheriff's cruiser rides past, its siren off but lights flashing in warning. You watch it vanish down I-45, carrying officers who may one day reopen these files. Whether they'll find new leads or merely watch the files return to silent dormancy remains uncertain. You exhale, the breath fogging in the cool morning air. You've witnessed the backlog, the pile of nameless faces and forgotten whispers. And you know, so long as these files remain unclaimed, the killing fields will hold its silence, guarding its secrets behind stacks of yellowed paper. You turn away and walk back onto the highway's shoulder, your footsteps clicking against the asphalt in time with a new day's first speeding cars. You stand before a cluster of portable workstations illuminated by battery-powered lamps. Technicians in latex gloves peering through magnifying lenses and microscopes. The air smells of rubbing alcohol and burnt ozone from UV light boxes. Each station devoted to reviving decades-old evidence. Here, modern forensics meets the silent graves. A delicate dance between cutting-edge science and bones, long dismissed as too degraded for analysis. A forensic geneticist holds up a tiny vial of extracted DNA, the pale pink solution swirling like mist in a glass tube. She explains how highly sensitive next-generation sequencers, introduced in the early 2010s, can now amplify microscopic fragments once considered unsalvageable mitochondrial scraps, hair shafts, even pollen grains trapped in fabric fibers. Mainstream forensic journals hail these methods as revolutionary, promising to crack cold cases nationwide. By linking victims to distant relatives through genetic genealogy. At the station beside you, a forensic chemist holds a plastic swab dipped in faded crimson residue, using liquid chromatography mass spectrometry first applied to crime scenes in the late 1990s. She teases apart chemical signatures that might reveal a victim's last moments, traces of cleaning solvents, automotive fluids, or even rare poisons. You catch a whiff of the solvents as she unsettles the sample, reminding you that such minute clues can make or break an investigation. A fringe detail emerges when the chemist mentions she's also testing for synthetic cannabinoids, an protocol born from a 2017 academic paper speculating killers might use exotic substances to subdue victims without leaving typical biological traces. No known cases have confirmed this theory, but some online sleuths insist that the absence of routine toxins in early autopsies hints at untested compounds. You move to a third workstation where a crime scene photographer scrutinizes infrared scans of burial pits. He toggles between wavelengths, revealing faint disturbances in soil layers invisible to the naked eye. Ghost outlines where pits once were, now collapsed by time and weather. Mainstream earth science research adopted infrared, ground-penetrating radar for archaeological digs in the 1980s. Today, forensic units repurpose the same technology to locate hidden graves in jungles, deserts, and yes, along this Texas corridor. A fourth technologist hunches over a 3D laser scanner, capturing every contour of a rusted shovel head recovered. At one site, the digital replica spins on a laptop screen like a phantom blade, its serrated edge and blood-red corrosion mapped with sub-millimeter accuracy. Fringe theorists claim the shovel belonged to a renowned Texas antique collector, suggesting a wealthy patron funded the killings for twisted amusement. No documentation supports this lurid tale, but it persists in dark message board whispers. You pause, recalling the mainstream breakthrough that first brought hope here in 2003. Forensic genealogists successfully identified an elderly victim's remains by comparing her DNA to distant cousins in public databases. An unprecedented win that set off a wave of similar cold case identifications nationwide. Yet for every success, dozens more samples fail to yield usable profiles. Investigators still question whether these sophisticated methods can truly overcome the ravages of time and environment along this sun-scorched highway. A virology specialist stands nearby, extracting ancient viral RNA from bone marrow samples. High-risk venture since most crime labs avoid biological hazards. She's testing for fragments of the virus that might indicate cause of death or time since burial. A fringe protocol inspired by pandemic-era virology advances. No homicide lab has fully validated the technique, but the promise of correlating viral degradation rates with post-mortem intervals has teams here buzzing with cautious excitement. You step back and survey the scene. 5 stations, each a beacon of scientific possibility in a place tainted by failure. A cluster of monitors displays software predictions mapping likely burial sites based on soil acidity, seasonal drought patterns, and historical highway reconstruction records. You watch as an algorithm highlights a patch of scrub grass 200 yards east of the shoulder ground that hasn't been excavated since the 1980s. Mainstream data analysts credit such geospatial tools with narrowing search areas by up to 70%. Yet they require accurate input to work. Investigators still question how many false positives these models generate, sending teams down fruitless rabbit holes. Your eyes catch the gleam of a stainless steel table, where next to a battered laptop sits a partially disintegrated denim jacket, one of many victim garments archived in acid-free bags. A textile conservator uses polarizing light microscopy to identify fiber origins, cross-referencing with mill production logs to determine which factories in Texas supplied that specific weave pattern in a given year. Fringe commentators posit that the killer sourced identical jackets to confuse patterns, leaving false leads in every grave. No documented evidence confirms this, but the theory underscores how minor details can warp investigations. You step aside to let a crime scene veteran fire up a portable mass spectrometer, scanning soil pellets that clink in a glass vial. The readouts revealed traces of rare mineral deposits found only in a decommissioned quarry north of Houston. A smile flickers across the veteran's face, a potential geographic anchor that might tie multiple graves to a single dumping route. It's a breakthrough moment, a rare convergence of technology, geography, and patience. At dawn's first light, the team packs up, vials sealed, laptops powered down, scanners folded away. Test results will take weeks, sometimes months to arrive, each report a thread in the larger tapestry of unresolved crimes. You remain behind for a moment, crouching by the spotless workstation, imagining the countless hours poured into tiny tubes and digital maps. The promise of these breakthroughs shines bright against the bleak backdrop of the killing fields. But as you rise and brush soil from your knees, you feel the weight of uncertainty settling back in. For all this technology, a killer still walks free. Investigators still question whether these modern marvels can finally close the chapters so long left open, or if they merely illuminate how little we truly know about the depths of human cruelty. You stand at the edge of a small county courthouse lawn as the late morning sun glints off the polished gravestones of cold case headstones, edge one bearing a name that was once forgotten. Today, families have gathered here to reignite their fight for justice, armed with fresh petitions, social media campaigns, and a fragile hope that refuses to wither. You watch as a mother pins her daughter's photograph to a makeshift memorial wall, the image bright against the weathered wood. Her hands tremble, but her eyes burn with determination. Mainstream advocacy for cold case review took shape in the early 2000s, when high-profile documentaries and non-profit initiatives pressured law enforcement agencies to reopen dormant investigations, leading to the creation of dedicated cold case units in more than 40 states by 2010. You recall those early successes, breakthroughs in the Gilgo Beach murders and the identification of the girl in the fridge, which inspired countless families to demand renewed attention. Now, those same forces swirl around these fields, where at least 34 young women vanished into silence. A volunteer hands out flyers embossed with app photos, QR codes, and stirring testimonies, one pleading, "Help us find her." You take one. It features a map of I-45's shoulder with red dots marking each discovery site. A fringe detail, printed in tiny italics, claims that an amateur diver once found a body in a nearby drainage culvert, an account dismissed by investigators, but eagerly shared on niche forums. As you slip the flyer into your pocket, you wonder how many more whispered clues lie hidden in the shadows of these fields. You join a circle of siblings, their faces etched with grief. One brother speaks into a smartphone, live streaming their appeal to viewers thousands of miles away. He describes the night his sister disappeared after leaving a cousin's birthday party, her laughter echoing around the cake before the smile was forever silenced. You feel the collective ache in the group's posture, a solidarity born from shared loss and a refusal to let time erase their voices. Behind them, a banner flaps on a chain-link fence. Justice for the highway's forgotten daughters. Volunteers paint letters in bold crimson, their strokes imperfect but heartfelt. A local teenager leans over and murmurs, "We're not letting them fade away." Investigators still question whether public pressure can truly sway case priorities, or if agencies resist reopening wounds that once went cold. A retired detective approaches the podium, his gait slow but steady. He recounts the early days of the murders, back when DNA evidence was a novelty and crime labs ran on overnight gut instinct rather than bulletproof protocols. He notes that in 2001, the Innocence Project first used DNA exoneration to free wrongly convicted inmates, a landmark that also underscored the power of re-examining old evidence. You watch his hand rest on a weathered case file as he pledges to personally draw connections between modern forensics and the original investigations. Across the lawn, someone sets up a projector against the courthouse wall. You see grainy stills of denim fragments, faded earring clasps, and surveillance photos showing a young woman walking into a convenience store. The images flicker under the projection, ghostly reminders that every small clue might one day fit into a larger puzzle. A voiceover begins, reading victim impact statements. "I'll never hear her laugh again. Her birthday will never come again." You shiver as the words echo across the brick facade. You step forward to speak, feeling the weight of your own words before you even utter them. You remind everyone that in Texas, the Department of Public Safety launched its first cold case DNA initiative in 2007, leading to more than 200 identifications within 5 years. That milestone shows what's possible when science meets compassion, and when families refuse to let bureaucracy bury their loved ones' stories. A hush settles as you reveal the next phase of the campaign, a crowdsourced effort to canvass the killing fields on summer solstice, placing small solar-powered lanterns at each known site. Bring your lantern, you say, and light the darkness these girls once faced. A murmur of agreement ripples through the crowd, and volunteers nod, clutching lanterns and voice recorders. A fringe rumor circulates that someone once found a silver locket glowing faintly under a lantern lit at midnight. But no one knows who left it. You step to the side as a woman kneels to tie a white ribbon around a chain-link gate. The ribbon flutters in the breeze, its pristine bow a stark contrast against rusted links. She tells you it represents the Circle of Hope, an unofficial network of donors funding DNA tests, digital reconstructions, and specialist fees. You think of how grassroots funding has reshaped investigations, whether for missing children or victims in remote locales, and you sense the power of collective will. As the ceremony draws to a close, the families release dozens of white doves. They soar upward, wings beating against the sky, carrying messages handwritten on tiny tags. Never forgotten, we love you, justice one day. You watch as the birds vanish into the blue, their cries fading like distant sirens. Investigators still question whether such symbolic acts can translate into real leads, or if they simply soothe hearts without moving needles. The sun climbs higher, its rays dispelling the last wisps of morning mist. You look around at the faces older mothers, grieving sisters, steadfast brothers each, one stubbornly holding on. You feel their hope pulse, like a heartbeat in the grass beneath your feet. If science, social media, and grassroots activism can coalesce here, then maybe these silent graves will finally speak. You tuck your hands behind your back and breathe deeply, tasting the promise of a new day. The campaign may be young, but it carries the weight of decades. And as you join the march toward the highway, you carry their lantern to a beacon in the hush, guiding the path from remembrance to resolution. You arrive just as dusk bleeds into the sky, painting the fields in shades of violet and rose. Dozens of lanterns, dotted along the grassy verge, flicker like terrestrial stars, their warm glow guiding you off the highway shoulder and into a hushed congregation. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax and wild mint, carried on a gentle breeze that rustles the tall grass and carries distant truck hums across the fields. You step between two families kneeling on quilts, each clutching a slender candle. Their faces are solemn but resolute, mothers in embroidered shawls, fathers in work boots, siblings holding hands as if tethered to each other's hope. A soft murmur ripples through the crowd as someone begins reading names aloud. Linda Miller, Cynthia Cantu, Maria Pena. Each name draws a steady rhythm of whispered here responses. Mainstream grief studies note that communal vigils can foster collective healing by transforming private sorrow into shared remembrance. Ahead, a volunteer rings a small brass bell, its clear tone slicing through the evening calm. You step forward into a clearing where a semicircle of candles frames a weathered wooden crosser, temporary memorial erected for tonight. Each candle bears a handwritten tag, age, date of disappearance, a brief note from loved ones. A fringe detail embroidered on a silk ribbon draped over the cross claims that on solstice vigils past, some attendees reported seeing candle flames flicker in patterns, spelling out initials, but no photographs have captured the phenomenon. A local minister offers a brief invocation, his voice soft and melodic. We gather not in darkness, but in light. We honor those lost and vow to carry their stories forward. You feel the words settle around you like a benediction. Investigators still question whether such public displays can pressure law enforcement to allocate more resources, or if they remain symbolic gestures without tangible impact. You walk among the attendees, pausing to exchange quiet nods and murmured condolences. A teenage volunteer hands you a small LED lantern shaped like a star. You switch it on, and its pale blue light contrasts with the golden glow around you. She whispers that it represents guiding souls home, a fringe tradition adapted from coastal fishermen who once lit beacons for missing mariners. Though not historically linked to land-bound vigils, the imagery resonates here with eerie poignancy. You settle onto a log beside two elderly women who clutch photographs and dangle small vials of wildflower seeds. One woman smiles through tears as she explains, "After the ceremony, we'll scatter these seeds in the fields, hoping new life softens the scars of this land." Mainstream environmental studies acknowledge that symbolic seeding rituals can strengthen community bonds and acknowledge ecological healing, even when biological success is uncertain. Investigators still question whether any physical action in these vigils translates into renewed investigative energy or simply soothes collective grief. The sky deepens to indigo as the minister invites the crowd to observe a moment of silence. You close your eyes, breath slowing as overgrown weeds sway in time with the distant drone of a passing semi. In the hush, you imagine the echo of footsteps long gone, the whispered pleas of those who vanished here. When the silence breaks, it does so with a single hushed chorus, "We remember." Beside you, a man carries a small recording device and invites participants to share brief messages into the microphone. "I love you, Cassandra. We will find you, Angelica." The recordings will be compiled into an online archive, a fringe method pioneered by digital memorial sites seeking to preserve oral histories beyond static stone. You speak into the mic, your voice steady but close to breaking. You are not forgotten. Once the recordings conclude, the crowd rises in unison. Together, you light a final dozen lanterns and release them into the night sky. They're flickering. Silhouettes drift upward, small specks of hope defying the darkness. You watch them ascend until they vanish against the velvet canopy of stars. Investigators still question whether these symbolic beacons can illuminate cold cases, or if true illumination lies in the painstaking work of labs and detectives. As the vigil closes, families drift away in clusters, extinguishing candles one by one and tucking lanterns back into pockets. You linger, kneeling to touch the damp earth where so many graves remain unmarked. The scent of beeswax lingers on your fingertips. You scrape a small depression in the soil and plant a wildflower seed, your private act of solidarity. You stand and take a final look at the semicircle of flickering candlelight, now reduced to a soft glow. Above, the first stars pierce the night, silent witnesses to your vigil. You tuck your hands into your coat pockets and follow the faint path back to the highway, each step echoing with the whispered names and promises of those gathered here. You slip off the highway and onto a narrow dirt track where the underbrush parts like a gauzy curtain, guiding you toward the cluster of weathered homes and trailer parks that spring up at the edge of the fields. Here, the real stories begin not in cold labs or solemn vigils, but in hushed confidences shared by frightened neighbors and passing motorists. You knock on a sagging door painted turquoise, and a weary woman peeks through the gap. Her eyes dart to the empty road behind you before she steps aside, beckoning you in. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of bleach and frying onions. Family photographs line the walls, smiling faces frozen on summer porches, birthdays long since past. A grandmother waves you to a worn sofa. They never told me what she looked like, she whispers, voice cracking. Just that she was pretty, 19 or so. You lean forward as she recounts the faded memory of headlights slowing outside her window one night in 1979. A white sedan idled at the curb, its engine ticking as it cooled. I saw her get out, the grandmother says, voice low. She looked scared, like she didn't know where she was going. Mainstream criminology has long recognized the frailty of witness. Memory under stress studies in the 1980s demonstrated that even brief trauma can warp recall, leading to inconsistent descriptions throughout an investigation. You nod sympathetically, aware that her recollection, though heartfelt, may never perfectly align with others. Yet, without her story, a critical fragment of the puzzle would have been lost. From the next room, a teenage boy emerges, eyes downcast. He claims to have driven by that same spot a year later, half awake on a late-night cigarette run. He remembers seeing a figure crouched in the ditch, beckoning him in with a trembling hand. I thought it was a friend messing with me, he says, kicking at the floor. I didn't stop. A fringe rumor passed among local youths suggests that someone later found an empty beer can beside that ditch, still warm, as if dropped moments before. No one has confirmed it, but it fuels the uneasy sense that witnesses were always closer than investigators realized. You rise and step onto the porch, brushing your jacket free of dust. The grandmother presses a yellowed scrap of paper into your hand, an address scrawled in looping handwriting. Mobile Station, Buckner Road. She says she passed the note to deputies decades ago, but it vanished into case files somewhere in county archives. Investigators still question whether critical witness tips were lost amid paperwork and red tape, or if they were intentionally overlooked to protect informants. The sun dips low as you climb back into your car and drive toward the old Mobile Station, its neon sign flickering. You park beside a lone pump and approach the faded brick building. Inside, the air is stale, mingled with spilled coffee and gasoline. A bent-over clerk nods at you from behind a counter cluttered with lottery tickets. You show him the note. He squints, then reaches beneath the counter, pulling out a battered ledger dated 1983. He thumbs to a page, recording a transaction at 11:42 p.m. Gasoline fill-up for a blonde young woman, no money. Paid later. The ledger notes her name, Angela Monroe. You trace her name with your fingertip, feeling the grooves of ink. Outside, a train rumbles by, shaking the windows. Angela was never found, but the clerk's ledger, forgotten for decades, became the linchpin for linking her disappearance to the broader pattern of victims along I-45. You slip a gloved hand into your pocket and bring out a small tape recorder. You press play, the scratchy voice of an anonymous caller, recorded by a police operator in 1986. I saw the car again, the voice says. Same make, same dents. It pulled into the gravel road off the highway. They buried her there. The caller's tone is urgent, frightened. Fringe blogs later dissected this recording, suggesting the voice belonged to a frightened hitchhiker turned accomplice, though no one ever came forward to confirm. You rewind the tape, letting the faint hiss fill the silent station. A cold breeze slips through a broken window and carries the scent of exhaust and recycling paper. You step outside, staring at the ramshackle pumps where Angela's last documented footsteps echoed. You imagine her standing alone, heart pounding, lantern light flickering at her side. and feel the weight of someone watching her from the dark verge, driving north. You pull over at a gravel turnoff where a retired trucker named Pete swears. He saw a covered trailer parked in a hidden clearing back in 1992. You find him leaning against his rig. A weather-beaten man with silver hair and a salt and pepper beard. He grips a battered leather cap in his hands. "I was late to a job," he says. "Pulled off here to call in." Heard moaning, his voice drops. "I didn't stop. Damn shame I didn't." A fringe account on a trucking forum claims Pete's report led to a brief search, but deputies found nothing Gand. Some say he was laughed off the radio. Investigators still question whether early dismissals of credible trucker sightings contributed to decades of missed opportunities. You snap a photograph of Pete's rig with his permission, capturing the rust-streaked door and faded company logo. Later, you'll overlay the image on a map, comparing its bearings to unmarked graves. You slip into your car again as twilight deepens, the sky bleeding indigo. Next, you stop at a cluster of trailers, lit by a single porch light. A woman named Rita invites you in. She sits you at a Formica table strewn with Polaroids, smiling snapshots of friends who once laughed together before disappearing into the night. She points to one photo, a girl in a red sundress, her arms slung around Rita's shoulder. "She's the one," Rita says, voice trembling. Her name was Lisa Parks. She vanished walking home from a dance in '88. You examine the image. The red dress glows under the flash, a stark contrast to the gloom outside. Rita mentions she called authorities, but was told to wait 48 hours. By then, Lisa's trail had gone cold. Shaking, Rita confesses she later tried to warn another friend, but fears she was labeled hysterical. Mainstream victim advocacy groups note that early treatment of witnesses, especially women reporting abductions, often influenced investigation quality, with delayed response policies hindering timely searches. Investigators still question whether outdated protocols silenced crucial voices in the earliest hours. Your recorder fills with voices and confessions. It's snipped a thread of fear woven into the larger tapestry of loss. You realize these private testimonies, buried for decades, hold the power to reshape timelines, narrow suspect windows, and recover lives once written off as another statistic. But only if someone listens. You drive back onto the highway as darkness fully claims the sky. Headlights carve twin paths through the blackness, and you sense the voices driving behind you, truckers, neighbors, lonely hitchhikers, each with a whisper to share. You flick off the recorder and tuck it away, knowing its contents could rewrite the case file. Investigators still question whether the chorus of witnesses, scattered across time and memory, can be coaxed into coherence, or if the silence of lost voices will forever haunt these fields. You turn onto the shoulder, engine rumbling softly. The gravel crunches under your tires. You step out, letting the night air wash over you, carrying the faint echoes of the stories you've gathered. Somewhere beyond the next curve, a flashlight beam sweeps the ditch, seeking what you've unearthed tonight, the fragile truth of whispered witnesses. You walk back onto the shoulder, the beam of your flashlight carving a path through the thick underbrush that encroaches ever closer on the asphalt. Every few steps, you kick aside tall tufts of grass, slick with dew, revealing the same telltale signs: shallow depressions, tufts of displaced earth, the occasional shard of bone glinting like a dull white promise. This stretch of I-45 feels alive, an artery pulsing with secrets, refusing to let them stay buried for long. It's dawn's grey light when you reach the spot where the most recent victim was found just 3 months ago. You crouch beside the disturbed soil, noting that the grave is barely deeper than the wheel ruts carved by passing semis. A lingering trace of makeup powdered deeper than the parched clay clings to a root, hinting at how quickly someone tried to cover their tracks. Mainstream forensic standards dictate that any burial deeper than 12 inches is considered an intentional concealment. But here the earth barely hid a body at all, almost as if the killer wanted discovery. Investigators still question whether the minimal effort was born of overconfidence or a message left for those who would follow. You press your palm against the cold, damp earth and imagine how recent rainfall washed away much of the surface evidence. Modern crime scene units now use oblique lighting at low angles to highlight soil disturbances, invisible to the naked eye technique adopted widely after high-profile cold case digs in the early 2000s proved its value. Yet here, you see nothing more than what your own eyes catch: a ragged outline, a smear of dark soil, and a cigarette butt stamped into the clay. A fringe tidbit whispers that this grave was marked by a subtly carved initial, a small A etched into the bark of a nearby juniper, intended as a signature. Late-night message board sleuths claim the A matches the same marking found beside a victim in 1999, linking crimes decades apart. No official report mentions the carving, and some detectives dismiss it as natural bark abrasion. Investigators still question whether this recurring mark is the killer's calling card or simply a coincidence. Sparked by the tree's growth pattern, you stand and turn your light toward the highway, its black ribbon stretching north and south, promising darkness or discovery in equal measure. You notice skid marks leading off the asphalt onto the grass, verge fresh deep and curving just beyond the grave. A closer look reveals a set of footprints pressed into the muddy edge, partially overlaid by tire imprints. The combination is rare. Most bodies here were found far from tire tracks, suggesting the killer either changed methods or perhaps relinquished control. Investigators still question whether this deviation marks a copycat or the same perpetrator, experimenting with new dumping spots. As you follow the skid mark inward, you find the victim's scarf snagged on a thorny branch, bright red against the brown and green. You pick it up gingerly. The fibers are damp, sticky, and carry the faint scent of cedar smoke. Fringe lore asserts the killer torched recent victims' belongings to eliminate scent trails and to confuse cadaver dogs, a tactic that would explain the charred remains often found near newer graves. Yet no burn marks appear on this scarf, which survived intact. Investigators still question whether the lack of scorching is intentional or merely the result of weather washing away evidence. Your flashlight beam drops to a small metal pendant lying at your feet. It's shaped like a compass rose, its surface etched with delicate runes. You hold it under your light, imagining a locket hidden inside, perhaps a keepsake from a past victim. A fringe theory posits that the killer kept such charms as trophies, wearing them in private to relive each crime. No pendants have ever been confirmed missing from victim reports, but the internet thrums with speculation. Investigators still question whether any personal effects taken from crime scenes were secretly passed along. Never catalogued by authorities, a truck rumbles past, its headlights momentarily blinding you. When your vision returns, the verge seems to shift. Mudslides off a slight incline, revealing a tiny bone fragment half buried beside the tire track. You kneel and brush away the mud, exposing part of a rib or perhaps a finger bone. You cradle it in a gloved hand, noting its crisp edges fresh from a new grave you haven't yet located. The immediacy of discovery sends adrenaline coursing through you. You follow a subtle scent on the breeze, something sweet, like wild honeysuckle mingled with antiseptic. It leads you to a hidden hollow beneath an overhanging bank. Within, you find a nearly complete set of footprints circling a spot of churned earth. In the center lies a fragment of a shattered phone screen. Its glass splintered but still showing a smudge where a thumb once pressed. You imagine someone dropping the device in panic or rage, leaving technology behind in a rush to cover tracks. Mainstream investigations now use geofencing warrants to pinpoint last known pings on phones, a strategy that solved dozens of cases. After 2015, but this device predates such practices. No ping records exist, and the SIM card slot is empty. Investigators still question whether deletions of digital trails were as calculated as the physical ones, or simply collateral damage. In their desperate flight, you rise, scanning the fields under the widening dawn. The quiet rustle of grass voices a warning. This killer adapts, learns, and evolves. The stretch of highway that once yielded sporadic discoveries now whispers of more frequent burials, each shallower, each marked by subtle deviations, a chilling confidence. You secure the bone fragment and compass pendant in evidence bags, tagging them with the date and precise coordinates gleaned from your GPS. In your memory, you etch the curve of the skid mark, the tangle of footprints, and the glint of metal against the dirt. Each detail layers onto the last, composing a map of brutality that stretches for miles. You step back onto the shoulder, letting the rising sun warm your face. Traffic hums steadily, oblivious to the dark carcasses hidden just beyond its path. You check your watch, 6:14 a.m. and note that this latest grave could have been dug only hours ago. The highway's heartbeat quickens as cars rush by, and you feel the pulse echoing in your chest as you turn to leave. You pause one last time and whisper into the wind. You thought you'd stay hidden, but you left footprints. Investigators still question whether these fields will ever fall silent, or if new graves will continue to surface along this cursed ribbon of road. You step into the glare of incoming headlights and walk toward the promise of answers, knowing full well that the road ahead remains fraught with shadows, and that the killing fields are anything but silent. You step onto the cracked pavement where a row of battered newsstands once hawked sensational headlines, their neon signs long since shuttered. Now, faded posters cling to peeling wood. Highway horror, killing fields, killer strikes again. You run your thumb over a grainy photograph of a teenage girl's face. Eyes wide in fear, cover image from a 1989 tabloid that helped spark a nationwide obsession with serial murder. Mainstream media scholars note that by the early 1990s, true crime coverage had ballooned into a multi-billion-dollar industry, with dozens of TV specials and magazine features each year feeding public fascination. You crouch beside the stands, remains now overgrown with weeds, and pull a yellowed flyer from the ground. It advertises a late-night radio show promising exclusive eyewitness accounts. From the killing fields accounts that were often dramatized, if not entirely concocted, fringe rumor holds that some of these witnesses were actors hired by producers to pad ratings, their stories recycled across multiple unsolved cases to create the illusion of a single, unstoppable killer. Investigators still question whether these fabricated testimonies misled detectives and muddied the trail of real leads. Standing, you let the wind carry the faint echo of static from distant broadcast towers. In 1996, a landmark journalism study condemned several true crime programs for prioritizing lurid narratives over factual accuracy, leading some networks to adopt voluntary ethics guidelines for crime reporting. Yet here, dozens of tabloid headlines and radio promos blurred the line between fact and fiction, casting every shadow as a potential suspect and every scream in the night as evidence of fresh terror. You step off the asphalt into a patch of wildflowers, disrupting a discarded newspaper page. The article proclaims new DNA breakthrough, a promise echoed in countless next-day bulletins whenever a cold case task force announced new tests. But most breakthroughs stalled in dusty labs, their results buried behind bureaucratic backlogs. A fringe detail suggests that one report of a DNA match was actually a clerical error, later retracted but never publicized beyond the local beat. Investigators still question whether premature announcements eroded public trust and discouraged witnesses from coming forward. Ahead, a flickering billboard, one of the few still lit features, a promotional image for a podcast named Blood on the Bayou, its host smiling beneath the title. Inside, the host's voice drips with ominous intrigue, promising never-before-heard survivor recordings. You recall that in 2008, NPR and other public broadcasters began producing their own true crime series with more rigorous sourcing and fact-checking. Yet privately produced podcasts often operate without such oversight. You wonder how many details listeners take as gospel without realizing they sprang from off-the-cuff speculation or recycled rumors. You kneel and run your fingers over the base of the billboard's support pole. Spray-painted initials TKF mark the spot where an illicit street artist tagged "True Killer" found before authorities removed the graffiti weeks later. Fringe whisperers claim the artist was a former detective seeking revenge on bureaucrats who blocked his case requests. No evidence supports that tale, yet it endures in chat rooms. Investigators still question whether vigilante tips born of media outrage help or hinder official probes. Turning, you shine your light along the highway shoulder, tracing the route of a nightly news cruise video, Vanit's faded stripes visible in the dim glow. Network logos long since peeled away, but you can imagine the glare of its lights as crews stormed the fields. Cameras rolling, dragging tarps across fresh graves to capture the perfect shot. Mainstream journalists later criticized such practices for contaminating crime scenes and disrespecting victims. A 2002 ethics review urged news outlets to coordinate with law enforcement to minimize interference. A crisp breeze lifts a cluster of printouts from a storyboarding pad, sending sheets fluttering across the grass. You gather them and see bullet points, unsolved mystery, secret cult links, ghostly apparitions. Each point blends documented fact with sensational flourish. Fringe commentators assert that one writer plagiarized details from a true crime novel, presenting fiction as eyewitness testimony. Investigators still question whether plagiarized or embellished articles foster more investigation or simply stoke public hysteria. You step over a length of cable remnants of TV lights that scorch the grass beneath their heat. Nearby, a chain link fence bears a banner reading "Media, tell the truth" in chipped red paint. Volunteers scrawled it after angry protesters confronted a film crew in 2014, arguing that sensational reporting discouraged tipsters by framing the fields as a backdrop for entertainment rather than a site of real, unsolved tragedy. Mainstream advocacy groups commend community pushes for responsible reporting, noting that accurate, measured coverage can inspire source leads without exploiting grief. You pull a small recorder from your pocket and play a clip of a network anchor's voice. Tonight, we reveal the chilling secrets of the killing fields. You've heard that exact narration in multiple network spots over the years, courtesy of syndicated packages selling the same sensational brand to local affiliates. Fringe conspiracy theories propose that this uniformity was orchestrated by media conglomerates to cement a national narrative, while critics argue it's simply a cost-saving syndication model. Investigators still question whether the sameness of those stories dulled public urgency over time. As your light flickers across the highway, you notice a small cluster of cameras trained on the road-automated drive-by dock units, capturing live streams for true crime enthusiasts. Subscribers pay monthly to watch someone else's vigil, with chat feeds cheering at every discovery. Fringe subscribers claim these feeds occasionally reveal unpublished evidence when vigilant viewers spot anomalies. Yet legal experts caution that streaming crime scenes without authorization risks privacy violations and evidence contamination. Investigators still question whether crowdsourced surveillance helps solve crimes or obstructs justice. You step back onto the pavement, its surface still warm from the day's sun. The media's reflection glistens in your mind-an industry that turned tragedy into spectacle, sometimes amplifying facts, sometimes smearing shadows across the truth. Yet without media attention, many cases would have dwindled entirely from public view. You feel the paradox tug at you. The same megaphone that sensationalized victims also broadcast their names to millions, generating leads that might never have existed otherwise. A low rumble signals an approaching convoy of news vans, their engines thrumming like a warning. You pack away the recorder and the faded flyers, knowing the field will soon be overrun by cameras and drones. Investigators still question whether tomorrow's headlines will honor accuracy over ratings, or whether the killing fields will again become fodder for the next sensational scoop. U-turn, letting the highway's hum guide you onward, leaving behind the skeletal remnants of media mayhem. As you vanish into the night, you carry with you one final thought. In a world driven by clicks and views, the dead deserve more than a fleeting glance before their stories slip back into silence. You stand at the threshold of dawn's promise, the highway's hum now tinged with the urgency of daylight operations. A convoy of armored SUVs idles behind you, their engines rumbling like eager beasts ready to break from a cage. Today marks the launch of the Gulf Coast Task Force 2.0, a specialized unit combining local sheriffs, state troopers, federal agents, and civilian analysts, all focused on the killing fields corridor. You feel the energy crackle in the air, a current of cautious optimism sweeping over the fields that have long been cloaked in darkness. Mainstream law enforcement milestones paved the way for this moment. In 1998, the FBI's CODIS database achieved national scope, enabling agencies to cross-reference DNA profiles across state lines, transforming fragmented clues into solid leads. Now, thanks to a recent grant, mobile CODIS labs will park beside excavation sites, slashing turnaround times from months to mere hours. You imagine detectives huddled over swabs, watching fluorescent markers dance on screens as names emerge from genetic shadows. Beside you, a mobile command center hums with activity. Inside, a behavioral analyst overlays decades of crime scene coordinates on an interactive heat map, each pulsing dot representing a victim reclaimed from anonymity. A fringe tidbit buzzes through the digital chatter, an unverified tipster claims. A secret coalition of retired Texas Rangers has been aiding the task force under the cover of night. Using old-school interrogation skills, no algorithm can replicate. No official record confirms their involvement. But the rumor's persistence adds an air of legendary zeal to tonight's operation. You trudge through the dew-damp grass toward an unmarked clearing where ground-penetrating radar technicians have flagged anomalies. This technology, first adapted from archaeological surveys in the 1990s, revealed buried Chalcolithic structures in the Middle East, now repurposed here to find modern graves. The scanner's gentle sweep hums beneath your boots, illuminating the Earth's hidden seams. You kneel to examine a circular disturbance 5 feet wide, precisely the size of a hastily dug pit. As the radar feed flickers on your handheld tablet, you sense the weight of every investigator's gaze behind you. You brush aside a tuft of grass, exposing pale soil disturbed only recently. Your heart hammers as someone exclaims over the combs, "We've got hits on 3 more sites, all within half a mile of each other." You swallow, tasting metallic anticipation as the promise of closure edges tantalizingly close. A forensic historian steps forward, placing a laminated timeline on the ground. It charts the evolution of task force models from the first multidisciplinary homicide squads of the 1980s to today's integrated approach, combining forensic genealogy, digital forensics, and even crowdsourced mapping apps. You recall that in 2012, a Chicago cold case unit pioneered a public-private partnership with universities, kickstarting the movement toward academic collaboration in homicide investigations. Integrating that model here has unlocked fresh grants and brought in eager graduate students. You rise and dust dirt from your knees. A task force coordinator hands you a tablet loaded with the new Field 2 forensics app, enabling evidence tagging and chain of custody tracking via blockchain technology. You tap through the interface, impressed by its intuitive design. Geotagged photos, audio logs, even voice-to-text transcripts auto-generated for every interview clip. A fringe rumor insists the app's code includes hidden Easter eggs referencing past victims' initials, but you can't confirm without digging through thousands of lines. You step back toward the SUVs as crash crews roll out excavation tarps. White overalls flutter in the morning breeze, like ghosts unwilling to fade. You catch a glimpse of the first spade piercing the sod, and for an instant, you imagine every victim's story etched in that moment. The final breath, the cold touch of soil, the endless vigil by families. Investigators still question whether even this state-of-the-art approach can repair the fractures of decades-old neglect, or if some truths lie too deeply buried to ever fully emerge. A nearby drone buzzes overhead, its camera beam slicing through the fields in parallel lines. You watch infrared overlays highlight moisture variations, another tip-off to disturbed Earth. You remember reading that in 2005. Environmental surveys first used drone-mounted LiDAR to map archaeological sites. Now it's hunting graves instead of temples. The technology's borrowed brilliance feels almost poetic in its repurposing. You join the perimeter line, where families and volunteers stand behind police tape, clutching a new array of lanterns, this time each inscribed with a victim's name and biographical snapshot. The scene is surreal. Cutting-edge labs and drones converge with quilts, candles, and handwritten posters. It's a union of science and humanity, a bridge between steel-toed boots and trembling hands. A volunteer passes you a handcrafted ribbon, its thread woven from scraps of victim-donated clothing. You tie it to your belt, carrying their stories. Into the field suddenly, a call crackles over the radio. Unit Alpha. Please confirm pit, number 4, 18 inches deep. Coordinates 29.5112N, 95.0808W. You verify it, heart racing, as excavation tools strike something unyielding. A hush swallows the sight. You step forward, every sense alert, ready to witness the earth yield its secrets. The blade catches on bone. A technician gently lifts a fragment cranial plate, brushing centuries of soil away. You exhale, feeling the collective weight of expectation. Lift for a heartbeat. Justice seems a step closer, and yet you know this is only the beginning. Investigators still question whether these new efforts will outpace the passage of time, or whether healing can truly follow so many years of silence. You step back, letting the team work. Above you, the sky widens, the sun peeking over distant treetops. You feel a tremor of hope, fragile but resilient. The Gulf Coast Task Force 2.0 is more than a name. It's a promise etched in morning light, a vow to the forgotten, a testament that even the darkest fields can yield to relentless pursuit. The sun now rests fully above the horizon, its warmth drifting across the clearing like a gentle embrace. You stand quietly, feeling the world soften around you as the frenetic energy of the dig gives way to a calm hush. The soil, once a stubborn vault guarding its terrible cargo, now lies opened, revealing fragments of stories long paused. In this subdued moment, you feel a deep exhale through every pore, as if the earth itself is releasing a sigh of relief. Families step forward under the easing light, their faces softened by tears and tentative smiles. Volunteers kneel in the grass, placing wildflower seeds in the freshly turned earth, each one a tiny act of renewal. You kneel too, pressing a seed into the damp soil, imagining it taking root, growing toward the sky, an emblem of lives reclaimed and memories honored. In the distance, the hum of generators and drones recedes into a gentle backdrop, replaced by the soothing chirr of morning birds. Soft rays filter through the pines, touching every blade of grass with gold. You close your eyes and inhale the scented air, the mingled promise of honeysuckle, jasmine, and fresh earth, letting it fill your lungs, steady your heartbeat here at the edge of tragedy and triumph. You sense a fragile peace settling over the fields. This is not an end, but a bridge between sorrow and solace, a quiet reminder that even in darkness, resolve can kindle light. As you rise, the world around you feels imbued with possibility, that new evidence will speak, that families will find closure, that the whispers of the past can guide the living toward justice. You step away from the excavation, the gentle crunch of soil underfoot echoing your own steady steps. Above, a lone fan on a lab table continues its soft whir, a lullaby for the weary. You smile, feeling a warmth in your chestnut, the heat of day, but the glow of hope. The fields remain vast and haunted, but today they've whispered back, sharing secrets at last. Now, as you walk toward the waiting SUVs, let the memory of this dawn linger soft, enduring, and reassuring. The killing fields may never fall silent, but within their hush lies the seed of promise, that with each sunrise, new truths may bloom, and with each breath, we edge closer to healing. Sweet dreams.